All right. Okay, so this is the discussion I think we all are going to be listening to quite intently on, Ask Me Anything on DeepSeek. So we have our moderator, Simon Maple. Hey, Simon.
Hello.
Guy Podjarny, founder and CEO of Tessl. Simon is also with Tessl as head of DevRel. We have, of course, Amanda. Hey, Amanda. Amanda
Hello.
Brock, CEO of OpenUK, of course. And Richard Sikang Bian, who is head of open source technical strategic initiatives at Ant Group. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you very, very much. And thank you all for coming. So first of all, I'll say a big thank you and welcome to everyone in the room at State of OpenCon. And the reason I specifically say State of OpenCon is that we're also live streaming directly to the AI native dev, and that's because we were planning about doing an AMA, and we were chatting with Amanda, and she kindly allowed us to do this in combination with State of OpenCon. So thank you very, very much to that. This will also be one of our podcast episodes next week on the AI native dev. So hello for people listening there, for people listening live, and also in the room. This is indeed an Ask Me Anything, so we will be having mics wandered around the room. It's very, very important for us, for this format to work, for everyone to ask the burning questions that are on your mind. We have an amazing panel here that can field those questions. I'll give a very, very brief intro to some of the topics that we're going to be talking about here. Then I'll ask each panelist to introduce themselves. So I would say there's a number of different ways in which we can talk about DeepSeek, but just for those who have been living under a rock for the last couple of weeks, DeepSeek is a new LLM model which has come out of, DeepSeek is a Chinese AI company, and they've built a number of models. The one that everyone's talking about now is DeepSeek R1. When it launched, just 10 days, I think you were saying, ago. 10 days ago, there really was a big splash in the market. We saw $5.6 million only spent on computing power for the base model, compared with what people are estimating around $100 million for OpenAI's O1 model. And yet the market shockwaves were pretty substantial. I've got some numbers here. The S&P 500 fell 1.4%. The NASDAQ dropped 2.3%. NVIDIA shares dropped 16% just by someone else's model coming out. NVIDIA, interestingly, were worth about $3.6 trillion. That went down to $2.9 million. So that's what? Trillion, sorry. Wow, it wasn't that bad, was it? 700 million dropped in just a day or two. Incredible. The market has recovered somewhat, though, thankfully. But this obviously has had a big impact. So I'm going to ask some questions in a second, but please, Amanda, the one person on this panel who needs very little introduction, but why not? Why don't you introduce yourself to those on the stream as well?
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Amanda Brock. I'm CEO at OpenUK, and we are the industry organization for the business of open technology in the UK. So open source software, hardware, data, standards, and of course AI. And we've been hosting our annual conference, State of OpenCon, here in London for the last 2 days. We are now on the final hurdle. We're almost done. And we've had many hundred people come through the doors over the last couple of days and join us in big discussions about openness, but particularly openness in the context of AI.
Amazing. And for those online who would be interested in learning more about that, where would they go?
OpenUK.uk. I didn't buy the domain.
Okay, no worries. Gaipo.
I'm Guy Podjarny, or Gaipo. I am the founder and CEO of Tessl, probably a bit better known for being the founder of Sneak before, which continues to do well, but I got drawn into the world of AI and am an addict and kind of back to entrepreneurship path on it. At Tessl, we're looking, as you may know, to really reimagine software development for the era of AI, and have always been sort of a long time open source kind of champion and passionate about doing that right, including in the world of AI.
Wonderful. And finally, Richard.
Hi, everyone. My name is Richard Sikang Bian. I always begin my introduction by saying that, my last name is like Spanish Bian, so it means I'm a good person. My first name is, this is perfect because we're in UK now, it's like the scone, as in the cookie, so I'm a pretty good cookie. Maybe that's why I got invited to this panel. So I've been working with Ant Group for like 4 years and a half. Actually built the Ant Group open source program office, and have been working on open source since then. In my last life, before I joined Ant Group, I've been working at Microsoft Microsoft and Square as a software engineer. So I've been on the technical side, and now I'm working on technical strategy aspect, reporting to the CTO office. Yeah, it's my first time in the UK, actually.
Well, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't tell you.
Thank you for coming.
But I mean, like, it has been a pretty long stretch flight, and I flew from Hangzhou. I think that's maybe one of the reasons, another reason why I got invited to this panel, because DeepSeek, they're based in Hangzhou. But Amanda, truth being told,
They are, and
Yeah.
so their terms and conditions all go back to Hangzhou. We'll
Sure.
talk about that later, I'm sure.
yeah, but there are 11 million of people in Hangzhou, so
Okay.
yeah, not everyone is well connected. But very glad to be here. Thank you.
Has it rained yet since you've been here?
Yeah.
It has, amazing. And have you eaten Indian food, our national dish?
No, actually, like, I'm pretty under the weather today. I just kind of
Oh,
Yeah, he's exhausted.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Got
Well,
like-
that'll definitely wake you up.
That's
That'll be
also
the
part of
full,
the British experience.
the
That's
full
right.
British experience. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Amazing. So feel free to put your hands up when you have questions, and we'll have mics that are dropping around. I'll kick off just quickly before we jump to that first question. And this is just to mention again some of the things that we brought up earlier and that Gaipo was talking about. How open is DeepSeek R1?
Yeah. So should I kind of kick us off? DeepSeek R1 and V3 before it are open weights models, which implies they are usable. Like they're weights, you can download them, you can use them just like Llama or some Mistral's models, etc. How open is an open weights model is an interesting question. I've got a bit of a beef. I mentioned it in an earlier session with the term open for it. I think of it a lot more like freeware. It is free to download. You can further tune it post. You can self-host it. You can do a lot of that stuff. But is it open? Not so much. What is open is the weight, the sort of the output of the training data, and so that we can use that, we can continue from it. But a lot of the makings of an open weights model, and that's true for DeepSeek as well, are not open. The source code to create it is not open. The data that was fed into it is not open, and the whole training process of taking that data with that source code through an iterative process to get it into those weights is not open. That is not unusual for open weights model. That's also true for Llama. It's also true for, again, most open weights models. But it is still it's still not open per se. You know, if DeepSeek or the Chinese government, whoever, have legitimately chosen not to do the next version, the community cannot fork it and continue and evolve from here, nor can people contribute to it. And of course, there's a transparency aspect. So there is a gap here. It's not unique to DeepSeek, but just because of the geopolitical nature of DeepSeek being developed in China versus in the US, it comes up a bit more about the lack of, we don't know what's behind the curtain, and sort of probably has surfaced as more of a conversation.
Is it all right to jump in? Sure. Yeah, so from a legal perspective, I was talking earlier about open source, and one of the real challenges we have is all of these words that we're all using. And we're using words to describe things, and we're describing things that are very new. And we're using words that we all have different meanings that we ascribe to. So when we talk about open source, you know, we can look at a legal definition, but you also have your experience. So if you've come to open source in the software context and you've come to it from a sort of community perspective, you think of it as a community collaborative thing. If you've come to it from a business collaboration, so we all have different lenses that we already look at open source from. And when we look at DeepSeek, so DeepSeek is more open source to me as a nuanced lawyer than Llama. And the reason is that DeepSeek, what it has released, is released and shared on an MIT license, which is an approved open source license, complies with the open source definition, and it meets the standard that anyone can use for any purpose what has been released, right? So the question then, as Guy's pointing out, is which bits have been released. Llama's different because Llama's not on an approved license. It doesn't meet the open source definition. And the main reason for that is there's an acceptable use policy, but actually there's a requirement that if you hit 700 million users of Llama, that you'll go and get a commercial license from Meta. And that introduces a friction that means that two things. It means that you can't rely on a free flow in your usage, building it into other products, because you may, if you're super successful, have to go back and get a commercial right and give Llama money or give Meta money. But also it means from Meta's perspective that they've hedged their bets, right? So when you enable people with open source, you enable them in a way that you enable your competition, So you give your competition your innovation, and they haven't quite done that because of this clawback where if you're super successful, we're going to get money from you. So there is a piece there around that. And then building on what Guy said about the inability, to see how it was trained and see what was going on, that is all right. But actually, they also provided some, I don't know if it's training documentation, I can't remember what they call it, but the sort of manual that goes with it. And I know that Hugging Face are now trying to sort of reverse compile that and look at the process
and
again.
replicate that,
Yeah, exactly. And they can do that because those instructions are there, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, awesome. Let's jump into our first question.
Yeah, thank you. When I read about DeepSeek, one of the things that really struck me was that the price decrease in training, on the face of it, looks like it's so large that it will really change the economics of LLMs in a way that means we can have them throughout the economy without, recommissioning all our nuclear plants. Do you think that this innovation allows us to have any hopes of additional jumps in efficiency of LLM? Because I think that would be quite profound if this became something that's both open and also widely available. I just wonder if you can comment on that. So what can we learn from DeepSeek to help us understand that?
Yeah, and actually this, I was having a chat with someone who was on was it Cedric who was on the first panel?
The first panel, no, Sylvain.
Sylvain, apologies, yeah. And I was chatting with Sylvain in the hallway track, and one of the amazing things he said was he wasn't surprised at all that they could train this model for 5.6 million, because they're competing here against an O1 model, which was done 18 months ago. So actually, a lot of the investment and work has been done very, very early on. So to actually replicate that is actually, pretty hard without doing that huge amount of research which led up to that. Who wants to take this question?
Maybe I'll just provide some of the intel as far as I know. First of all, just a disclaimer, I work for Ant Group, opinions are my own. In fact, when we talk about DeepSeek, was only getting so popular in the past 10 days, but in reality, back in those days, actually worth mentioning, their technical report for R1 is very open. And it's not the first time they did it. Because if you rewind everything back into the May 2024, they actually posed this V2 model with a pretty nice paper indicating a lot of optimizations they did there. And there has been a lot of adoptions within China for the V2 models and the optimization methodologies by a lot of these AI companies. So back to that question, I would say I'm definitely imagining, the cost of training will essentially cause two things to happen. One, there has been intrinsic fear from many of the companies that they can no longer play the training game. So we do see a lot of even the most popular startups like 01 in China, they change their games from training to inferences. So now by knowing that the training can be, one magnitude cheaper, it actually provides a lot of the players come back to the game again. So I can totally imagine that the training game becomes a more interesting one, because we are working open source. We know that open source will bring a lot of those kind of natural innovations. The more players, the merrier. So that's definitely one thing I see. The other thing which I'm kind of seeing is I think the DeepSeek model by itself is actually not a surprise. Because there has been this kind of 6 months of road pavement over there. One thing I personally learned a lot is the way that they organize their company is very unique. They hire all these kind of young talents into the company with no hierarchy. Each one can actually make their own proposals, and if their proposal is actually correct, they can pretty much ask for a lot of the cars just to do their own experiment. And that kind of reflects a lot about what OpenAI, at the very beginning, right? We heard similar things. I, for one, is really welcoming that, because it kind of feels like it's a rare, almost feels outlier cases that we see in how some of the organizations in China behaves. And I do hope that will be leading to a new wave of innovation, as far as I can tell. Yeah.
Yeah, I strongly agree with that, and I think there's a lot of reasons to think that there will be additional leaps. I think one of them is kind of well said here, which is just sort of more people can participate in the innovation attempt, where before the gate of capital was very high. That's slightly countered with like how much do you need it? I mean, they had it's very much like the necessity is the mother of all invention here, which is they had to solve some hardware problems because otherwise they did not have the hardware that was able to overcome those problems. And so I think part of that necessity maybe slightly diminishes, so there's a risk of that. But someone will figure it out, and more people can participate in the game. More innovators does translate to more innovations. I think the other piece of it is this is still relatively new. You're right that like V2 and then V3 after it, like there were a lot of innovations, but I do think it drew everybody's attention, especially in sort of R1. And there's probably a wave of subsequent optimizations to this technique, whether it's from other smart people that now build on top of it, or from dedicated hardware that actually does optimize for these specific use cases that have been done, versus for the between in-chip or counter like cross-chip memory utilization that's been done before. So I think there's a lot of optimization there. But I also think that there's one of the interesting things that they've done is around mixture of experts, and a little bit the kind of improved ability to divide up the world's knowledge in sort of simple terms, and think about the fact that you don't need your doctor to participate or help, or like your doctor's knowledge to participate when you're writing code. Like you might not need or vice versa, and sort of being better able to pull in the right knowledge at the right time, which is a part of how they've done the load balancing and the expertise here, might drive us towards, like with that combined with the low costs, might drive us towards more sort of either specialized models or sort of slightly silos of knowledge, which are much cheaper and much faster to run. So I think there's a lot of this is like you turn a page and now there's more opportunities for innovations here. It might take a while until someone like literally turns another page and there's like another 10x improvement. But I think there's a journey towards 10x is all but guaranteed.
Can I add, just on a more sort of business and commercial level and on an innovation level, I think this is a super important piece. However we're going to define any of these words about openness, what fundamentally we're seeing happen here is that it was trained on existing models that had a level of openness about them. Whether it's full open source, whether it's open innovation, open access, whatever it is. And what that does is it allows others to come and use that innovation and innovate themselves. And it's that old open source phrase about standing on the shoulders of giants and iterating and evolving the innovation. And I think that's absolutely critical to everything that you're all talking about.
And I think it's critical to the success that we've seen.
Yeah.
But does that lead us into a place whereby companies are more likely to hide their models or hide their core models such that others can't replicate the success of others, like DeepSeek here? I've heard rumors, I'm not going to substantiate them, but I've heard some people believe that there are companies that are hiding V5 models right now that they're building other models on, but they're hiding that almost like as their their gold mine that they don't want to expose because others might be able to do that. The value here is clear in terms of what DeepSeek has already shown, but is this behavior almost encouraging a closed angle to it as well?
I guess it could, right? I mean, who knows? But what I do know, and I love this, I don't know if you saw this, on Friday, Sam Altman, you may have seen me with it earlier, I'm going to say it for like the 5th time today, said that OpenAI is on the wrong side of history when it comes to open source, that they should have opened their weights up, and that he is looking into this. He's personally an advocate for it. He then caveats it with it's not high up their priority list and that not everybody in OpenAI agrees with him. But that was on Friday. So at least one person is reacting in a way that's not what you're suggesting.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Well, I think first of all, like standing on the shoulders of giants is interesting. Like the word that comes to my mind is standing on the shoulders of reluctant giants, because I don't think it's fair to sort of say that like distilling the sort of the frontier models is necessarily building on open data. It is building on data that exists there, whose right for existence is already in doubt around how did they get their data. And so there's a bit of a turtles all the way down, problematic turtles all the way down problem there. But I do think that there's a fundamental question now around leaning into competition versus trying to restrict access. It's true in the sort of US-China relationship, given the failure of the chip restriction to maintain their perceived sort of US leadership. It's true in the context of the models and keeping them in. I for one think that you can't really hide technology. It's a bit of a lost battle. And if they want broad use, the only way for, say, OpenAI to kind of, hide their models is to really restrict access, which in turn restricts their market opportunity. And especially given the incredible valuations that these companies are running at, I think that's practically not viable. Yeah. So I think that's what, I think the comment we're hearing from Sam Altman is more along the lines of, you can interpret them at least as, hey, it looks like we kind of lost the battle of controlling distillation of our models, and at the same time we're not winning the battle of people building on top of us because our models are not open weights. So we're kind of hedging it. We're neither winning this nor winning that. Yeah. Maybe we should lean into the open piece so more people build on us. Because anyway, we're going to need to monetize the app level either way.
Can I jump in just with one thing before, Richard, you do? Just something you come back to, I've noticed all day, Guy, is the data piece. And I think we've got a real challenge here. And for the industry, I think it's the piece that all the sort of legal wonks and governance people really need to focus on, and it's data. And I don't think we need to define anything beyond working out, at least in a short time, working out what the data being open means. And whether it's data we're really talking about, or information, what the rights that we're worried about are, whether they're like copyright, intellectual property and things, whether it's privacy, whether it's contract confidentiality, what it is, and how you get those rights if you need them, and where you want to use them and how you want to use them. And I think that's really, from a sort of lawyery kind of perspective, the bit that we need to focus on to give you the next stage. And until we work out how that data and information can really be opened up and do it in a way that's replicable and transferable, we don't progress. We're always going to hit that block, right?
Yep, I agree.
Yeah. Let's see if there's any other questions, because we're at risk of being a tell me anything versus an ask me anything.
Sorry.
We've been waiting a very long time for this.
Yep, please.
Hi there. Hi, thank you very much. I wanted to build on a conversation in a previous session where it was discussed that now there is a definition of model openness, the model openness framework, and there's a model that's now reached Class 1 open science level as a really big milestone into a move towards open source AI. And my question to you is, what would you like to see happening next? As something that would be a landmark moment where you can see us really beginning to gather momentum into having truly open source AI.
So I'll probably tackle that. Also in conjunction to answer the last question. I would say I'm totally not surprised for that comment, because I think open is a choice. Mm-hmm. The way I'm kind of looking at it is information arbitrage is a competitive advantage. People use it. But it's also probably the lowest, right, in terms of skills. If you're just using information arbitrage as your competitive advantage, it's probably not that solid long term. That's basically my perception towards open versus closed. But it's intrinsically hard to tell people to perform in such a way that you should open and to be more open, because it's a choice. Another thing I'm kind of looking at is it's just like when you play poker, right? The chip leaders is having different hands. That's why, I honestly don't see intrinsic issues with some ultimate strategy, because if you're a chip leader, you have this kind of leading advantage. Being closed is probably a best strategy. And now rechange all your phrases is also your best strategy. But the way I'm kind of looking at it is just how I think Jim Zamlin and many others have in the past 10 days have been writing a lot of articles in terms of, they call this a trump of openness win over the close. Which, to my extent, I kind of agree with that. The way I'm kind of thinking about open, regardless if it's open source or open model, it's the same thing. It's just like when you're holding a long spoon, right? Imagine if everyone's having a long spoon. If you're in the hell, everyone is starving because you can't feed yourself. But if you're in the heaven, everyone is filled because they're helping each other. That's what I see as a positive externality. So I would say that in the next, I would say 1 or 2 years, I'm expecting like a balance, intrinsic balance across the global geolocation boundaries, that there will be this kind of open group, that they fit in each other, and we're seeing this kind of fast accelerated process of technology advancement. Where at the same time, the people who are holding the strong models like Anthropic and ChatGPT, they might choose to stay open and really set up business model explorations over there. I, for one, feel it's a pretty stable, I would say, 2 years explorations until it reaches the next plateau in which we might be seeing different behavior. Yeah.
I would love to kind of answer the gentleman's question. I think I would love to see scale and contribution in open models. Like open source AI has actually existed for a long, long time. It's only and true open source with the data, with the code, with everything around it. Where it hasn't existed, and I think still doesn't exist, is in the truly large, in the first L in the LLM, right? And dealing with that in sort of large scale. So that's one thing. We're seeing things bigger. We also heard the OpenLLM France project earlier on. That's a 7 billion parameters. And so I think it's good to have those projects. I'd love to see them scale, and I think that would naturally scale as in they run it for larger models, which does present some technical challenge. But I think the real unlock is contribution and ability to fork. So if we get to that mode that, like in open source, you're able to say, hey, I like this model, but it is, I want to have a different filter on the data. I want to have a different, or I can contribute. I want to add data. And it opens up a whole bunch of questions about how do you curate that? How do you handle the cost of training? Fine, they might have dropped, but they're not low. They're sort of still in, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. So it's not the same as I'm going to run this open source project's fork on my computer, right? It's more substantial. So how do we deal with all of those? What's the curation process? What is the forking process? What is the relationship between them? I think these are all solvable problems. And I guess what I would hope to see is an entity, and again, easiest to imagine like some Linux Foundation. That's the ideally that it's not national, although this has very much become a national conversations. But ideally like a Linux Foundation style sort of global consortium with industry type entity that tries to really kind of lead foundation. And I think if you tap into that, if you tap into the power of community contributions and things like that, you can beat any of the others, and it can actually become foundations where a bunch of these become these Kubernetes. We talked, one of the panels here was like, can there be a Kubernetes moment for AI? I think this type of thing can be the foundation on top of which a lot of products are built. So.
Can I just, very quickly, because we do want to ask more questions, I think you're absolutely right, and I think forking, just that ability to keep the leadership in check, to bring a community together and to go in different directions, I think that's something that if we got to that point, it shifts everything. And I totally agree with you about this collaborative idea, this foundation for AI that allows everybody to collaborate and move forward. I think that's absolutely critical.
Another question just here.
Not a tech question, but a legally question. So reading the mainstream press, they seem to say that DeepSeek took OpenAI's IP. I presume that's what that means, is that there's been some sort of model extraction attack and they've extracted the weights. A, did I understand that correctly? Seems not. And B, if I did understand it correctly, how was this model sort of produced seemingly out of nowhere? What was the training data, et cetera, et cetera?
I can take a kind of a first crack here in doing it. So the process of using another model to create your new model is a legit process called distillation. And in fact, as Simon alluded to before, it was kind of one of the perks that you got from having a frontier model. You'd build 4.0, and then you would use that to distill 4.0 mini out of that, right? And it was one of the perks, one of the things you got in return doing it. What's been happening as these products became prevalent is people using other people's models for distillation with more or less permissions, from those entities. And I think the primary kind of claim here is that there's been heavy distillation. I don't think, or at least I haven't heard any kind of indication that there was, breaking in and stealing of the weights of OpenAI, but OpenAI has a general, widely used sort of self-serve API to access. So it's not that sophisticated. You don't need to be that sophisticated to sort of leverage some basic bot network to be able to effectively run a large volume of queries on top of that. And you might have dropped a few $1 million in OpenAI's lap in the process. They're probably not counted in that 5.6 million, but you sort of have a lot of those results. And then when you look at open weights model, if you were to use Llama, for instance, then you can do that. And in fact, that's what we're seeing now, is we're seeing one of the things Hugging Face is taking advantage of is while they don't have access to the data, they have access to the model and the weight. And so they can train this would-be named O1 model, as in open one, like the Hugging Face one, with the DeepSeek R1's results. So I think it is less a cybersecurity challenge and more of a legal ownership challenge of are you allowed or not allowed to do it. I think for the services, it's not really a question. You are not allowed to do it. But just the practicality is that you pretty much can't stop it unless you lock it behind kind of closed doors, right? And even then you can fully block it, but then you can reduce the risk as you also diminish your market.
And I think they say on if you read the data on Hugging Face, I think it's very clear that they've used Llama, and is it Quen or Quack? I always get this the wrong way around, but they've used 2 existing LLMs. They haven't disclosed that they've used OpenAI. I don't know, I can't comment on the legal side of it. I don't know, if they have or not, but they acknowledge that this is what they've done to get to this point, and that's how they've reduced the training costs.
And it's hard when you cross legal regimes, to an extent. If OpenAI thinks Hugging Face did something different and they're both US companies, they can sue them within the US legal system. When the same is true between a US and a Chinese company, or really the US and a British company are doing it, a bigger divide to the sort of a US and Chinese company, that legal system doesn't protect you as much, and so you're kind of a little bit stuck.
Right. I mean, put things in perspective. First things first, they did actually disclose that as part of the technical report for distillation, which is a choice.
And there's nothing wrong with that, right?
Yeah,
I mean
there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually a choice.
Legitimately.
So, and plus, distillation to some extent is not magical, right? The way I'm kind of reading some of those articles now is like I got really perplexed. It's like if distillation is really that magical, what's going on with the other companies? Are they like they don't know what they're doing? Right? So I think it's basically like if there's no enough evidence indicating that such a technique is going to be helping you to a certain level, I would consider those with, I would say, grain of salt in terms of how much help it does to the model itself. But what they actually claim to be as part of distillation is like the distillation process is going to be helping the reasoning of the model, right? It will help train the smaller models to be a more reasoning model. That's what it is, but it has nothing to do with the foundation model itself.
Yeah, but I think it's important to note that the part of the cost savings and the speed and everything comes out of the fact that they can build on that distillation because they can use synthetic data produced from these frontier models to be able to do something that otherwise would have been very expensive and time-consuming with human feedback. Eventually, you're distilling human knowledge as well through this sort of human feedback. That's just a much more cumbersome and slow process. And so I do think it is significant, and it's sort of perceived that everybody's done distillation, and it's just about the ratios. Right. What it does mean long-term is that it just becomes that much more expensive to build a frontier model. So you really are challenging the financial viability of someone building a frontier model in which they cannot rely on, well, they will still leverage past models, but they need to invest dramatically more to build that model. Subsequently, because it's being commoditized, they might not be able to charge per API call nearly as much as they could before. And so how do they really justify that? Which to an extent, I do come back to like contributions working.
I hate to cut you off there, Guy.
But
I know, sorry, I love to cut you. No, I hate.
Can I very quickly add something?
If it's 10 seconds.
It's 10 seconds. So there's a very good post last week on LinkedIn from Ben Brooks talking about the document that allows you to understand how they did it, the manual, and how that by giving that with the data, they're trying to fix some of these problems to show you how it's there. So go and do your own if you're worried on the IP front.
We've got about 4 minutes left. I'm going to challenge 2 questions in that time. We have one over here. Go.
All right, can you see me?
Yep.
Hi, it's Anne-Marie from Tech Informed. I was just wondering how Senator Josh Hawley's proposed Decoupling AI from China Act, his proposed act, might affect those working in open source. They're talking about fining companies millions of dollars and even individuals millions of dollars for collaborating with Chinese companies.
Wow, has anyone heard this?
I'm against it. I think that we should be focusing on global collaboration. I think it's how we innovate best, and it's not something that is good for society or for innovation.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say it comes back to like there's choice, right? Do you compete or do you try to restrict access? I mean, does the U.S. have sufficient financial force to deter people and with enough punishment and such from or companies from supporting it? And does it produce some slowdown to other companies doing it? Probably yes. Does it actually change the end result of it? Probably no. And so I think, but I think it's an understandable response that is basically come from the same place that to begin with introduced the U.S. chip restriction that has failed. I'm curious to see where the government gets, like probably the most unpredictable U.S. government we've sort of ever had, and so we'll see where we go. And the reality is the UK and others can make whatever choices they want, but really, like this really boils down to what the US will decide. It doesn't seem like a viable long-term decision to me.
And Richard, you're going to surprise us all by supporting it, I'm guessing.
I'm going to surprise you by following the others. Well, but I mean, like, put things in perspective, knowing a little bit about US legislation, I do live in the US for 11 years. There's an intrinsic time gap between someone write a proposal to it becomes legislation. So I wouldn't be too considerate about it because nowadays the internet is too advanced. That, like when people write something, it becomes just way too obvious. And I can understand why, like people can be like very concerned about it because but after all, it's only like one senator writing a proposal at a very early stage. I for one really vouch against it because I've been living in many different countries. I think that like one thing which I really benefit from is like being in the cultural immersions I had my high school in Singapore, I took GCE, and I had my university in Canada, and I've been working in the States before I can go back to China. I kind of feel a lot of those cultural immersions will actually make me a better and well-known person. I can't tell I'm smarter, but most of the time I'm actually consider as far as all of this kind of like dimensions or factors are considering. I definitely feel that those cultural immersions will help me and make me a well-rounded person so that we can actually sit together and talk about all of that. Yeah.
All right, wonderful. Well, we're out of time, unfortunately. I know there are many other questions, so why don't we, if you're in the room, let's take it into the hallway track. If you're online, reach out podcast@tessl.io for questions from the podcast, or join us on the Discord, the AI Native Dev Discord. So let's continue the conversation, because these are really important conversations to have and really important to ask these questions and get these answers. A big thank you to Richard, Amanda, and Gaipo, and thanks all for your contributions.